Let me tell you a story from my childhood. When I was probably no older than 7 or 8 years old, I didn't really play a lot of games, on account of my parents wanting me to focus on school. As a result, I spent a lot more of my time reading books from the local library, and one series I really ended up getting into was Animorphs. It was the story of several young teens who gained the power to transform into animals, and used it to fight off an insidious alien invasion. The series was very successful, and eventually Animorphs received a video game adaptation called Animorphs: Shattered Reality, and the moment I heard of it, I started begging my mom to buy it for me. Eventually, she relented, since my birthday was coming up anyway, and so we headed down to our local GameStop. She stopped me before I went in, however, and said something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have to buy your own birthday gift. I'll go in myself and buy the game for you." So she did. When she eventually came out, she had 2 video games in her hand. One was the game that I wanted. The other was Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. Apparently, the store was having a buy one get one half off sale, and since my mother had no clue about video games, the clerk had taken it upon himself to give a recommendation. If you're not aware, Resident Evil is a survival horror franchise mostly centered around zombie outbreaks. Resident Evil 3 in particular follows major character Jill Valentine as she attempts to escape Raccoon City in the middle of such an outbreak. You spend the majority of the game essentially making your way through a ruined city while avoiding Nemesis, a monstrous zombie with a rocket launcher. In other words, it's not exactly something you'd get a little kid. Look, in the long run, Animorphs Shattered Reality ended up being a rather mediocre game. I'm sure most people would have been much happier with Resident Evil 3, considering how beloved the game and franchise is now. However, I was a little different. I was honestly a massive wimp when it came to horror and anything that was remotely gory, and Resident Evil 3 happened to tick both boxes. Ironically, so did Animorphs Shattered Reality's Game Over cinematic, which creeped me out so much that I never ended up finishing it. The game terrified me, and while it was in my possession, it spent most of the time face down in a corner, so I wouldn't have to see it. You might think that's an exaggeration, but I really was extra sensitive to that sort of thing as a kid. My parents were always careful to shield my eyes whenever a movie played anything remotely lewd or sensual, but if it was violent and gory, they often didn't bother. I remember them playing movies like Bride and Chucky in front of me openly without a care in the world, and while the usual stereotype with kids was to find that kind of stuff cool, I honestly got scarred by a bit of it. I had an overly vivid imagination as a kid, I still do, and anything I saw during those movies sort of stuck with me in a bad way. My weakness with gore, meanwhile, is a symptom I can also trace directly back to being 5 years old in a Nickel City, encountering a Mortal Kombat game for the first time. I played the game not knowing what it was, and fought a match against a katana. I lost, and subsequently received a Kiss of Death fatality from the CPU. In the context of modern Mortal Kombat, a fatality like this is not really all that grotesque, but at the time it traumatized me pretty badly. It made me averse to looking at anything that portrayed blood, and even anything too vividly red, as it would remind me of the former. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was also popular around this time, and one of the adverts featured a close-up of Sarah Michelle Gellar in a deep crimson red. I hated this ad, and would do whatever it took to avoid seeing it, even when it was posted up in malls. Time has passed though, and I'm a lot older now. I've grown inured to the horror experience, and while I still couldn't say I enjoyed the genre much, I can at least get through a movie like Saw without jumping out of my seat, and even appreciate a manga like Uzumaki for its inventiveness in making me uncomfortable. Despite all this, I still have yet to touch another Resident Evil game, or any survival horror game for that matter. You might think it's silly, but even after all these years, I never really got over my initial impression of Resident Evil 3. I was seriously terrified of the game, to the point where if I heard the boom of the title screen, I would flinch. I've outgrown it, of course, but the memory remains, and fears don't go away that easily. If I'm honest though, that's one fear I'm tired of having. Resident Evil has become one of the biggest franchises Capcom has to offer, and despite past trauma, I can't deny that I've always been curious about the series and the praise constantly lavished on it. The characters and the lore are a big part of popular media now, and for it to still be a big blind spot kind of bugs me. To add to that, survival horror as a video game genre is honestly quite large. Game series like Silent Hill and Alone in the Dark are highly praised, yet I've always avoided them. And for what? I might not love horror as a genre, but to skip out on classics just because of a childhood memory feels silly. It's not like I'm trying to conquer my equally large fear of heights by walking a tightrope. I'm just playing a video game. So I did, and I did it by playing the game that started it all, Resident Evil 3. You know what? It was fine. I know, underwhelming, but I never really believed that my experience with the game as an adult would have me sweating bullets or leaping into hysterics. Sure, the game did get me a couple times, but that's sort of its function as a horror game, isn't it? Sorry, you probably want to hear what I think about the actual game. Well, you know what? It's actually really good. It's definitely better than Animorphs Shattered Reality, that's for sure. It doesn't have the most intuitive controls, and I can count a number of times where tank controls genuinely screwed me over, but to be honest, that really only adds to the experience. The idea of panicking making it hard for you to control yourself does appeal to me, even if in practice it can get a little annoying. Actually, I'm honestly surprised by how much closer Resident Evil 3 is to adventure games rather than action games. A lot of the game is about getting from point A to point B, collecting and using items to solve puzzles, and managing resources effectively without running out. Combat is honestly not much of a focus, and there are even decision points that can change the course of the story from playthrough to playthrough. In the end, I am having a good time with Resident Evil 3. It's pretty hard though, so I haven't hit the end screen yet, unfortunately. I am new to the genre of course, so that's a factor, but I would have liked to have gotten through the game before making this video. However, I have played Resident Evil 3, and that was a lot better than I could manage as a kid all those years ago. It's not impressive growth, but it is something. I know some people are thinking, why the hell did you start with Resident Evil 3 and not Resident Evil 1 like a normal person? Well, the reason is simply because Resident Evil 3 has a particular significance to me, and it didn't feel right to pivot to a different game and act like it was the same challenge. I know it's all symbolic at best, but I wanted to prove to myself at least that I'm over the ridiculous overreactions I had as a kid, and I'm gearing up to check out the rest of the series the first chance I get. Thanks for watching. I'm definitely going to play the other Resident Evil games, though for now I'll probably stick to the classics. I might make a video about it too. If you'd like that, or if you'd just like to talk about Resident Evil a bit, please feel free to comment about it below. Subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and I'll see you next time.